Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the member of the ICG committee who's responsible for running our webinar programme. So in today's webinar workshop, in fact, you'll be hearing from Sam Toon, owner of Mind Brilliance. Sam was previously research director at Trinity McQueen and is now a freelance research professional and a member of the ICG. She's been a quant researcher for most of her career and works in both areas, with a specialism in bringing together multi-methodology projects in a clear, story-led way, particularly for retail and media clients. After practicing mindfulness for some time, she trained to teach mindfulness during a career break and set up her own consultancy teaching mindfulness workshops and courses. She now runs this alongside her research work and enjoys bringing calm to the sometimes hectic world of insight. This webinar workshop will last a little longer than usual, up to an hour, but time allowing, Sam has agreed to take questions after her talk, so please type them into the question box as usual as we go through, and we'll read them out during the Q&A session at the end of the workshop. Sam will also be putting up links to further reading on the Wellbeing Forum of the ICG website, and we'll use the forum to answer any further questions if we run out of time today. We're really grateful to Perspective for sponsoring this webinar. Perspective Research Services provides help at every stage of the data journey as an end-to-end experience or simply to dip into when needed. They operate one of the largest independent call centres in the UK and state-of-the-art viewing facilities in the heart of London. They provide qualitative recruitment, face-to-face fieldwork, B2B mystery shopping and data processing services.
Sally, can you show your screen, please?
Can you not see the screen?
We can't. We saw the first one.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Before I hand over to Sam, here are the next webinars to note in your diaries. Some are open for registration now. As you can see, we've got a busy programme. There are still sponsorship opportunities for a couple of forthcoming webinars if anyone's interested. This costs £100 for a lot of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day. So our speaker today is Sam Toon, and I'll now hand over to Sam.
Hello, so can everyone see my screen at the moment?
That looks good.
Yeah, brilliant, okay. And you should be able to see me as well. Let me just try and make this a little bit smaller on my screen so that it doesn't get in the way. So thank you for joining me today, and thank you to Sally for the kind introduction and to Perspective for sponsoring the session. Let me just move that on. So Sally already did a bit of an introduction to me, so I won't dwell on this, but I think, you know, it's sort of interesting to kind of explain how I came to be doing mindfulness as well as research. And I think the main reason that I got into mindfulness initially was because, like many people in the industry, it's sort of time pressured, there can be a lot of stress, and mindfulness was a way for me to find some balance with that. And I think, over my time working in various agencies, I did see, quite a lot of people burn out of the profession or go on to do other things that they didn't necessarily enjoy as much, but were perhaps less stressful for them. And it got me to thinking about how I could share mindfulness with people and, help to, in some small way, I guess, to kind of reduce the stress that people were feeling. So that's definitely one of the reasons why I got into teaching mindfulness, and it's something that I still continue alongside my research work. And what I'd like to do to begin with is just a really short, only around 1 minute arrival practice, because it can be very easy to be, physically present somewhere and not necessarily be emotionally or mentally present. So what I'm going to invite you to do just for a minute or so is just to close your eyes. You can stay where you are in the seat that you're in. And just start to get a sense of the space that you're in. So just, even though the eyes are closed, just visualizing the space around you, feeling the temperature of the air, getting a sense of the things that the body is touching. And then taking the attention inside the body. So just feeling all the way from the feet to the top of the head, getting a sense of the entire body. And then seeing if you can come to the center of the body. So that probably feels like somewhere in the abdomen. Just noticing what the breath feels like from this space. And then from this central space, just connecting with your reason for being here at this webinar today. So why are you here? And then allowing the attention to widen back out again to the entirety of the body. And widening back out again to the room around you. And then when you're ready, just opening your eyes. So we're talking about mindfulness and how that's relevant to researchers today. And I think if you consider what we do on a daily basis as researchers, we are often deep in cognitive activity. So we are, planning research projects, we are, in deep conversation with participants or looking at data from participants, we are analysing things, or we're in meetings with, clients or with stakeholders or with other researchers. And all of that kind of takes place in a very mental realm. Processing information, we're thinking about things that have gone in the past, we're thinking about what might happen in the future, or trying to predict that. So a lot of our time is spent in this very heady space, and we are less aware of what is happening perhaps, in our own bodies, what's happening in the space around us, what's happening with the people that we are, emotionally connected to. And that can provide us, in modern life with a sense of disconnection. And I think it's something that as a society we feel, but I think it's exacerbated by research because we spend so much time thinking. So it offers us quite a narrow perspective on our lives. And what we do with mindfulness often is to try and widen that perspective back out, so we get a much richer experience of what it is to be alive. So we're more than just what happens in our heads. And, one of the sort of thinkers in terms of mindfulness and neuroscience is a guy called Dan Siegel, and he talks about the wheel of awareness, which is, everything that we are able to be aware of. And one of the first things that he points out is the first 5 senses. So there we've got, touch, taste, feeling, smelling, hearing. And these are the things, primarily that help to keep us safe. So, if we taste something, does that taste safe to eat? If we see something over there, is that a threat? If we touch something, does that feel okay on our skin, or do we need to stay away from it? So there's a lot of, evolutionary reasons why those senses are there, but they are also very much a part of our experience that we don't connect with a lot. And, this is one of the reasons why when people do anxiety exercises, they're often taught to ground. You've probably seen that, there's loads of memes that have the kind of, name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, and so on. Because when we connect with our senses, then we are less in our heady thoughts, which is where anxiety comes from, and we're also reassuring our nervous system that we are safe. Okay, we're safe in this moment, there's no immediate threats. The 6th sense, as Dan calls it, is the sense of interoception. So this is what happens inside the body, and there is so much information that is constantly being transferred between the body and the brain, which is really there to help us regulate and to help ourselves survive and thrive. So things like, our breath, our heart rate, what our digestive system is doing, whether we feel hot or cold, whether we feel pain or comfort. And again, that's information that we use to decide, should I be eating something now? Do I need to make myself warmer? But it also gives us a lot of information about our emotional state. So we can tell from, our breath rate, from our heart rate, whether, we are angry, whether we are sad, whether we are happy, whether we are relaxed. So there's a lot of information that we can tune into that gives us information about our state, and we can also change that as well. So I'll talk a little bit about breathing exercises later on. So if we recognize that we are in an anxious place or a fearful state, for instance, there are breathing exercises that we can do that actually change what's happening inside the body and help us to shift out of that. The 7th sense is this mental activity that I was talking about. So this is where we often get caught up as researchers, very much in terms of planning, doing, thinking about what needs to happen, thinking about what someone said the other day. We're constantly caught up in our mental activity. What are the government doing? Do I feel safe? And that's fine. It's really necessary to our species to survive. There's no way that we would have survived, much stronger and deadlier animals in the past, or, really challenging environmental conditions if we weren't really good at figuring out problems and planning for the future. But we can't spend our entire lives there, because it's, it kind of takes over everything. And it means that, without all of these other senses telling us that we feel safe and connected, we become disconnected and we don't feel safe. And that's where a lot of, mental imbalances can come from, like anxiety and depression. The 8th sense, as he calls it, is connection. So this is our connection to things like family, community, the earth, other beings. And it sounds a little bit kind of, new agey, but we are social beings, we are connected to the earth, and in the past it would have been innate in the way that we lived. We would have lived in small communities that we were intimately connected to. We would have been working on the land, so things like the seasons would have been very pertinent in our minds. So all of that kind of information and connection that used to be innate to our experience isn't there anymore. We live in much more fragmented communities. We live in ways which disconnect us from what's happening to the land around us. So, we sometimes have to make a bigger effort to connect with those things than perhaps we did in the past. So I guess the challenge as researchers is that if we know that we spend a lot of time in this kind of mental activity space, the challenge is to spend more time with these other senses, with the 5 senses, with interoception and with connection. And I guess when we teach mindfulness, or when we learn mindfulness, what we do is to, go through a series of kind of practices that re-establish this balance so that we are not too focused in one area. So I just wanted to go through, a brief description of what mindfulness is. I'm sure a lot of people have read or heard things about it, but just for the purpose of this presentation, I guess, having a common theme in mind. So mindfulness really is the simple idea that by paying attention to the present moment, we can bring ourselves back into connection, as I was talking about on the previous slide. So Jon Kabat-Zinn is kind of the pioneer of mindfulness in, Western society. So he really brought kind of Eastern thoughts and practices to the West and kind of made them make sense in a kind of non-secular fashion. And what he's really describing here is the gentle attentiveness that we cultivate in mindfulness that allows us to pay attention to what's happening deliberately but non-judgmentally. So that means that when I sit here in my chair, then I can pay attention to how my body feels, for instance, and I might notice that there's pain there, maybe in my lower back, but I don't need to get caught up in stories and judgments around it about, pain is bad. I have that pain there because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, the pain's always going to be there. So when we remove ourselves from those stories, we can really connect with the primary experience of what it is to be alive. I guess what mindfulness also does, and I'm not sure whether you've had this experience before, but if you've ever been on a car journey and you've got to your destination and you realise that you just cannot remember the car journey at all because you've been thinking about so many other things whilst you're on your way. In mindfulness, we would call that autopilot. So what your body's done is to automate the kind of tasks that you do all the time, which is driving, so that your brain can be in that mental realm thinking about things. So it's autopilot. And I guess what mindfulness does is to take us out of that autopilot so we can see things really for what they are, rather than what our body or our mind is kind of fashioning for us based on previous experiences. And if you learn mindfulness, if you do, say, an 8-week course, there are various different practices that help to cultivate what it is to be mindful. So there's daily meditation, which, the meditation really is there as to practice that skill of paying attention on purpose and non-judgmentally. And there's lots of different meditations, ones that might focus on the body or the breath, on compassion, on connection. So many different meditations, but really at the heart, it's about choosing something to pay attention to and doing so gently. There's also mindful movement, which helps us to re-establish connection with our body. Often we're very disconnected from our body. So mindful movement helps us to connect again, to create more somatic awareness. So somatic is within the body. And also it helps us to start applying mindfulness to an activity or to something that isn't meditation. The same goes for mindful activities as well. So normally there'll be different mindful activities, like maybe say taking an everyday activity like brushing your teeth or making a cup of tea, and really doing it mindfully. So, paying attention to all of the kind of sensations that happen. So if it was brushing your teeth, like, the minty smell, the feel of the brush, what it feels like in the hand, what muscles you're using, noticing what thoughts go through your mind, and then coming back to the activity itself. So again, it's about practicing not being in autopilot. And then there's also various concepts and teachings as well. So for instance, one of the concepts that we might teach in mindfulness is about the negativity bias. And the negativity bias is something that happens in the brain, which means that we pay more attention to negative things than we do positive things. And we suspect that there's good evolutionary reasons for that. So if you miss a carrot one day as a Stone Age person, you know, you're probably going to survive to try and find another one the next day. If you miss the saber-toothed tiger, then you're probably not. So our system got really good at scanning for and detecting threats. And that means that it takes a fraction of a second for a negative activity to be stored in our brain. But it takes 10 seconds or around 10 seconds for a positive experience to be stored in our brain. So there's things that we can do about that through mindful, you know, practices. We can, you know, start to notice when positive things are happening, and we can make an effort to mindfully stay with them for a good 10 seconds or so. And that helps to shift the balance in our day from being predominantly negative to positive. I guess, you know, the other example of that would be the modern trend for gratitude journals, for instance, or just noting down things that you're grateful for. It's the same thing. It's about noticing and staying with the positive so that you can offset the brain's negativity bias. If you're interested in that, you can look up the work of Rick Hanson. So he's the guy who described the brain as like Teflon for positive experiences and Velcro for negative experiences. But in any case, what all of these things do, the meditation, the mindful movement, the activities and the concepts, all of them really are about restoring balance, restoring this connection with our whole experience as a human being, rather than just, you know, this very narrow field of what we're thinking. So what I was thinking that we could do then, as a kind of an experience of a felt sense of meditation, is to do a short meditation now. So I did send out in an email yesterday, you know, to say, you know, you can do this sat up or you can be laid down. So if you've prepared an area for yourself on the floor, you might like to lie down now. Or if you're in a chair, just try and get a sense of sitting with both feet on the floor so that you're nice and stable, and with your back nice and straight, but with the body relaxed. So we don't want to introduce lots of tension around the shoulders. We can just sit here nice and alert, but, you know, gentle and not holding any tension in the shoulders. If you're lying down, a good posture can be to bend the knees and allow them to gently come into each other. So that tends to help people just stay a little bit more alert when you're lying down for a meditation, so that you don't go to sleep. So when you're ready and when you've got your position sorted, just allowing the eyes to close. And perhaps taking 3 deep breaths. So taking a long breath in and a long breath out. And again, a long breath in and a long breath out. And just one more long breath in and a long breath out. And then just allowing the breath to return to normal. And perhaps just connecting with the whole of the body. So perhaps tracing a chalk outline around the body. Perhaps connecting with any surfaces that you're touching, so perhaps the chair or the floor beneath you. And just allowing the body to be still. And we're going to use the breath as our anchor for the meditation today. So when it feels right for you, just starting to pay attention to the sensation of the breath within the nose. So maybe noticing cooler air coming in and warmer air going out. And then seeing if you can notice how the breath feels in the throat. So does the breath feel different here? Or if you're struggling to connect with any sensation here, that's fine too. So just allowing yourself to notice what's there. And then taking the attention down into the chest. Just perhaps noticing how this is a very 3D affair in the chest. So you might notice that the ribs expand side to side. You might notice that the ribs expand front to back. Or you might notice that they expand vertically as well, so up and down. So we don't need to change the breath anyway, we can just allow it to be just as it is. And you might find, as is only natural, that thoughts arise or come into your awareness. And if that happens, that's perfectly normal. We can just notice those thoughts and then come back to the breath. And then taking the attention down into the abdomen. Just noticing how the breath feels differently here. So some people describe the breath in the abdomen feeling like the calm in the deep ocean beneath the waves above. And then perhaps taking the attention round again to just feeling that sense of the breath in the lower back. It's a really subtle feeling in this area. And then letting go of any direction in terms of where to feel the breath and just allowing yourself to connect with the breath in the space that feels right for you. And just seeing if you can connect with that whole experience from the moment that you first start to inhale to the very last moments of the exhale. And when you're already starting to let go of that focus on the breath now and just reconnecting with the entirety of the body, so just widening the attention out slightly. And just noticing what's here. So how do you feel now after these moments in meditation? And then perhaps starting to take some deeper breaths to wake the body back up. Perhaps moving the toes or the hands. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes. And just give yourself just a few moments really, just to kind of reconnect with where you are again, perhaps just to note anything that came up for you during the meditation. Normally when we've done a meditation like that in a class, we would do a kind of round of inquiry so that people could share their experiences, but we won't do that here. But if you do have any questions, then obviously please do put them into the question function and we'll try and answer them at the end. Okay. So I just wanted to continue with this theme of balance and just look a little bit more deeply at the emotion regulation system, which is kind of systems like the endocrine system or the nervous system, and how they work together and how they evolve to help us meet our needs. And really, you know, this kind of delicate balance came into being to help us feel safe, to feel connected, and to have meaning and purpose. So the threat system at the bottom is the collection of systems which help to protect us. So if we notice a threat, then the body will release hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, and they will prepare the body for the flight or fight response, basically. So, you know, this would often be accompanied by feelings of anxiety, of anger, of fear, of disgust. And really what the body is doing is prepping to be able to do something quickly. Now, that's great in circumstances like if we were to run out into the road and there's a bus coming, we wouldn't even have to think about stepping back into the pavement. Like our body would notice that there's a bus there and we would step back before we'd even thought about it. So this is a very instinctive system. I think you lose about 40% of your kind of prefrontal cortex functioning when you're in this mode, specifically because if you started to think about these things, you wouldn't have time to act. So it's great in those types of circumstances. What it's not great for is when we are at work and we have a client, you know, land something on us at the last minute or something goes wrong and our body goes into this threat response. You know, in modern day life, that's not ideal. We'll talk a bit more about that after I've gone through these other emotional regulation systems. So the next one would be drive. So drive really is about finding meaning and purpose. So it moves us towards resources. So that might be things like food or shelter in basic terms, but obviously in modern terms, that's things like, you know, ambition, career goals, maybe political goals, whatever they may be. And the hormone involved here is dopamine. So when we achieve things like when we find the food, when we find the shelter, when we get the promotion, you know, video games hack this as well, you know, in like minor achievements in games, we would release dopamine. And so the feelings here are about wanting, achieving, progressing, completing. It's those types of things. The third thing is the soothe system. So really, this is what brings us back into balance after the threat. So if we recognize we're in threat mode and we don't need to be, the soothe system kicks in and helps us to manage that distress. It also promotes bonding amongst people. And so the hormones there are about oxytocin and serotonin. And we feel contented, connected, trusting, safe. So those three things all work in tandem with one another. And what often happens in modern society is that we can get stuck in some of those areas, and that's when we tend to have problems with mental well-being. I think the life of a researcher particularly tends to disrupt that balance because we tend to spend a lot of time in drive and threat. So, you know, in drive, we're striving towards, you know, goals, we're fulfilling client needs, we're chasing, you know, career goals, for instance. And in threat, that's probably things like, you know, deadlines, you know, things that might go wrong during field work, not feeling good enough about certain things. And they're not bad in and of themselves, you know, like it feels good to achieve things. and a certain amount of stress is good for us. It provides motivation, but we were never designed to spend all of our time in those places. That's why the soothe system evolved. Without it, we don't thrive as individuals. We might be surviving, but we're not thriving. So what we have to do is to try and make a conscious decision to spend more time in this soothe space. And in mindfulness, we tend to think about these things as doing mode and being mode. So doing mode is when we're doing something, either to move towards it in the case of drive, or to move away from it in the case of threat. To move into the soothe system, really, we need to allow ourselves just to be present with what's here. And you can think about it a bit like an energetic bank balance. So the doing is the debit from your account, and the being is the credit. So we've got to have enough credit going in to kind of allow for all the things that are going out. So we won't go through this exercise now, but it might be interesting, to have a think about this at some point and just say to yourself, what does my energetic bank balance look like today? Am I really balancing the amount of doing and being that I'm doing? So being activities would really be anything that we do in mindfulness where there isn't an active goal. So meditation fits into that, but if you do something where you get into a flow state, like running without a specific goal, some people might do it with creative things like drawing or knitting or gardening, anything where you can just allow yourself to be without the pressure of trying to achieve something. So people say, well, what are the benefits of mindfulness? I guess the immediate benefits of mindfulness, the things that you would notice initially, are that it feels relaxing. So, mindful activities tend to stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's essentially the soothe system. So when we relax and we engage in those types of activities, we feel safe and the stress levels and hormones drop. It's also good for resetting and refreshing, if you've got writer's block or you're feeling creatively blocked or just a little bit overwhelmed, taking some time to do a mindful activity generally lets us reset and refresh. However, there's lots of longer term benefits of mindfulness, and there's been thousands of studies which have looked at what mindfulness does. So some of them I've listed here. So one of them is reduce stress. So research has shown that when you do an 8-week mindfulness course, it generally lowers the inflammatory molecules and stress hormones by around 15%. We also learn new strategies for coping with stress as well. So for instance, we look at how we can notice what's happening and respond to it rather than reacting out of habit. We look at how our thoughts aren't facts. We look at how we can change our perceptions of stress, and all of those things can give us healthy ways to deal with stress that we didn't necessarily have before. Also, I think with a skill which is really key for researchers is empathy. And yes, especially as a qualitative researcher, but I think also as a quantitative researcher, we've got to be able to empathise with the experience of other people, whether we're doing that directly through our discussion with them or through whether we're sort of seeing what the numbers have told us and we're trying to understand what that means. So the increase in empathy is one of those things that they've shown through research. They've shown that when people do an 8-week course, they report better levels of empathy, but also in randomized trials, when they've done a mindful activity and then looked at how many people give up their chair, for instance, to someone else afterwards, they've noticed much more elevated levels of that happening. And they think the reason that this happens is for two reasons. One, that when we engage with mindful activities, we move the brain out of self-preservation mode. So we're no longer in threat or in flight or fight, where the body is very focused on just keeping you safe. It's actually able to kind of consider what might be happening for other people. And secondly, mindfulness teaches us to deliberately be aware of other people and connected to the present moment. So not only are we more able to receive information from other people, but we are actively seeking it out. The other thing is increased creativity. Again, lots of research here which shows that it supports the brain activity that enhances creativity. So there's two types of thinking that we need for creativity. One is divergent thinking, the other is convergent. So divergent is that initial stage where you're just coming up with loads of ideas, anything that could possibly work. Convergent is the stage where we rationalize that down. So we think about, is that on brand? Would that work with the audience? And so it's all the rational kind of things that help us to narrow down ideas. So if you've ever sat down at your desk and thought to yourself, like, I'm just out of ideas for this presentation, it's probably because you're caught up in that convergent mode. Convergent mode is when we're actively trying to do something. The divergent mode is a bit of a more elusive thing. The divergent mode only happens when we're not trying. So, I don't know where your best ideas come, whether they're in the shower, but I often found that when I was working in an agency and I used to go home and walk my dog at lunchtime, like all my best ideas and ideas for kind of presentations would come whilst I was walking the dog and I wasn't trying to do anything. And the reason for that is, activities, especially ones that are outside and in nature, activate the default mode network in the brain, which is where the mind wanders, it's where the mind daydreams. So that's where a lot, that can be the seeding point for divergent thinking. So mindfulness supports that in a number of ways. It supports us in stopping us from being in this constant trying to do mode. But also it allows us to recognize when we need both of these things so that we can choose spaces and activity that support those different types of thinking. I guess another interesting thing that mindfulness allows us to do is just to become more aware of our own biases. And there's all kinds of cognitive bias training now, on different types of topics. But I guess at their heart, what they're about is becoming aware of what's happening within your own thoughts and thought habit patterns in the brain. So you have to start to recognize what those might be. And again, with mindfulness, what we do is we practice that ability to become aware of our thoughts and to not see them as facts, to be able to question them and say, oh, I notice I'm thinking X, Y, Z. Is that true? So, I remember very early on in my career, being told, having come from, the Teesside in the northeast, that Northerners don't drink wine with their evening meal, and that was why we wouldn't be doing any research in the north. And I remember sat there in the meeting saying, but hang on, I've just come from there, fresh sort of 21-year-old, people definitely drink wine with their dinner, but they were so caught up in this idea that Northerners don't drink wine that they just, and that affected the whole research design then, because it meant they left out a huge proportion of people. Similarly, there's, like the availability bias, for instance, which I guess is one that would come up in qualitative research, for instance. So our most easily rememberable anecdotes and things that we've noticed during fieldwork are the ones that we'll hang on to. So again, we can challenge ourselves with that, and say, actually, I'm remembering that really well, but is that the full story of what happened in the research? So definitely awareness of our own biases, also potentially, helping us to develop healthier working patterns as well, both through self-compassion, through asking the right questions. So, rather than thinking I'm completely overwhelmed by this, what can I do? Thinking about, well, what are the things here that I need to do and what are the things that I don't? Being able to acknowledge the choices that we do have, and just bringing mindfulness into your day. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment, which just help us to promote more stress-free working practices, I guess. So if you want to learn mindfulness, then there's various ways to go about that. You can take a course in person, perhaps not at the moment. I'm doing one-to-one lessons online if people want them. If there was enough interest from ICG members, I could do a group course. But also you can do things like, Breathworks run an online course, which is very easy to access. There's also the NHS accredited one, which was the Be Mindful 4-week self-study course. So you can look those up I'm not affiliated with those in any way. But the benefit of doing an 8-week course, of really learning it with a tutor, is that you take your time to build your skills sequentially. It's not one of those things that you can just learn in 1 hour or learn in a workshop. There's a lot of skills which kind of build on each other and layer on. It gives you a deeper knowledge, and also it means you can get some personalised support and feedback. So there's lots of stuff that crops up. And I think, you know, one of the cautions that we need to make as mindfulness teachers is that when we open ourselves up to our experiences, we're opening up to everything that's there, the good and the bad. So if there's unresolved stuff from our past, then that can crop up. So it's really important, I think, in those moments to have someone there who can support you and help you to kind of work through what's coming up for you. There's various apps that you can use. Again, I'm not affiliated with any of these, and I'll put them in the wellbeing forum at the end, but just some that I've used myself or that other people I know have used and have enjoyed have been Waking Up with Sam Harris and Headspace. They're both paid for. Smiling Mind is a good free app. It's not, the functionality is not as slick as the paid ones, but the content is good. So if you're learning mindfulness, then what are the potential challenges for researchers? I think definitely the thing that I see amongst the people that I talk to is that we have long days, and also potentially this kind of cognitive overload that I was talking about earlier. And I think one of the most simple things that we can do to overcome both of those issues is to take mindful breaks throughout the day. So by mindful breaks, I mean really short breaks throughout the day to kind of come out of this thinking space and back into a different part. So if you think back to that wheel of awareness, if you notice that you're really heavily in that kind of mental space, can you come back out and be in your senses? Can you come back out and be in your body? Can you come back out and be in connection with someone else? And these breaks are all supposed to be really short ways of doing that. So it might look as simple as a pause and just taking a deep breath and really noticing how that feels in the body. It might be about noticing transitions, so the transitions from one thing to another. So between sitting down at a webinar like this and just taking a few moments after that and thinking about, right, so I've had that webinar, I'm here now, how do I feel? And then where am I going next? Okay. And that gives us a real sense of just punctuating the day. I think, you know, sometimes life can be a bit like looking at a whole sheet of paper with writing on it with no punctuation or grammar. Okay, and what these mindful breaks do is to kind of put in the punctuation, put in the spaces, put in the capitalization, so we can start to make sense of things a little bit more clearly. And mindful moments is the other thing. So I described that a little bit earlier, and you know, if you want some suggestions, I'm happy to put them in the forum for ways in which you can take mindful moments. But it might be just having a cup of tea. So being mindful of the process, you know, boiling the kettle, the sound of the kettle boiling, feeling the weight of it in your hand as you pour it. You know, noticing the aromas and what's happening with the water as the tea steeps within it. You know, when you've made the cup of tea, bringing it to your lips and tasting it really mindfully for that first sip. So really being present with what's going on. Breath exercises are things like, they're basically exercises where we change what the breath is doing. So when we're stressed, often the breath can be quite shallow and up here and quite quick. And if we want to activate our soothe system, we take the breath to make it much more slow, much more deep. And what that does is tell the nervous system that we're safe. So it doesn't need to be in that flight or fight mode. So an example of that would be the box breath. So we won't do this now, and I'll put this into the forum so you can find it if you want to. But you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And what happens with that is that it mimics what the body does when it's in the soothe state, and it means that you calm down. It's also a mindful practice as well, because we are deliberately paying attention to the breath rather than what's happening in our thoughts. Connecting with nature. So I talked a little bit earlier about how it can, you know, activate the default mode network in the brain, but really there's a kind of soft fascination that happens with nature, which means that our whole body soothes and calms down. And just spending time outside, or even just looking out of the window and noticing, you know, the trees, can be a really short and simple way of just coming out of the thoughts and connecting with the world around us. Mindful eating as well, very similar to what I described with mindful moments. It's really about getting into the senses when you're eating or drinking something. So what can you taste? What can what can you touch? What can you smell? What's the noise? So really connecting with all of that. So just to close, if you want further support, I'll be on the Wellbeing Forum. You can ask me questions there. You can send me an email if you want to chat further about things. The Market Research Benevolent Association have told me that they can offer support for mental well-being, funding for people who are in a tight financial spot. So it's worth contacting them if that sounds relevant for you. There's also organisations nationally like Mind and Anxiety UK if you want help with those, with specific mental well-being issues. I guess just as a final point of reflection, I think it's worth just either noting down or just thinking to yourself right now, sort of what the one thing is that you'd like to take away from this talk. So what's the one thing that you could do or change that might just help to make your day a little bit more mindful? Okay. So I want to thank you for listening, and hope that you've enjoyed it, and I'll hand over to Sally if there's any questions.
So can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Sam, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I feel so much more relaxed at the end of that than I did at the beginning when my slides weren't being shown. So that was really, really useful. And thank you so much as well for all those very useful links that you've provided us with for further research and reading and practice. We've just got one question at the moment. This one, I'll read it out. Hi, Sam. Thanks for walking us through the meditation process. Really appreciate it. I have been practicing for a year now, and I'm curious to know about how to be just in flow of observing our breath. Can you give any help there?
I guess it would be useful to maybe have some more conversation with the person. So if they want, they can, contact me afterwards, because it would be useful to know whether it's the thoughts interrupting that flow with the breath, or whether, it's something else. I think really, it's time and practice to a certain extent, which obviously you're already doing. I think it's offering ourselves a lot of self-compassion as well. I think it's easy to get frustrated with meditation because it doesn't go how we want it to go. So, if it does get interrupted by the thoughts, or we feel like we can't keep it focused, we can start to feel frustrated. And I think it's just noticing any of those emotions that might come up and just allowing ourselves to feel them and say, I notice I'm feeling frustrated right now. It's really normal. This happens for lots of people. And so I think that's the first step, is just being really kind when any challenges arise. And I think the second step after that really is just to practice that process of just coming back. So it doesn't make it any less of a meditation if you have 100 thoughts and have to keep coming back to the breath than it does if you were to spend the whole time just focused on the breath, okay? The whole point of the meditation really is as a training to help us notice our thoughts and then be able to return to the thing that we are focusing on. So, if you have to do that 100 times during a meditation, that's absolutely fine. That is the meditation. The meditation is to notice the thinking and come back to the thoughts. So I think, time and patience, being really self-compassionate, when any frustrations arise, and just accepting that the meditation is just the practice of noticing when we're not with the breath and the flow, and then allowing ourselves to come back to it.
That's brilliant. So a couple of other comments really rather than questions. First of all, absolutely wonderful, thank you. And then thank you, I've been writing a gratitude diary for most of this year and the differences that it has made is incredible. The point about, sorry, can you hear?
Sorry, I know I just said that, that's really good. Sorry, carry on, Sally.
The point about it taking 10 seconds to register a positive thought versus 1 to register a negative thought was really useful to reinforce the benefits of gratitude. So that's just positive feedback on your session. Those are all the comments that I've got to read out and questions, but I know for anybody else listening that Sam has said that she would be very happy to answer any more questions through the forum or directly. I guess they can contact you directly, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to email. What I'll do is I'll upload some information and some links, some of the things that I put in the presentation into the forum. And then I'll send an email around and just say when it's been uploaded so everyone knows when it's there.
That's fantastic. So I think something else has just come through. Thank you very much. Really great session. Does such a thing as mindfulness for families exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a family and we do our best to practice mindfulness. I think that comes into how we relate to one another. So, you know, mindful communication is a whole area to look up. Mindful parenting is a whole area to look up. There's a group on Facebook called Mellow Nest Parents, and they offer some great advice on sort of more mindful parenting techniques. And I think also as parents, you know, when it's age appropriate, we can also start to remind our children to kind of get in touch with their bodies and how they're feeling and to talk through that with them. I think with my daughter, who has some what would we call it, like emotional processing additional needs, I think one of the things which has been really important for us has been to say to her, I see that you're feeling frustrated or sad right now. Tell me about what that feels like in the body. And she'll tell me that, okay, can you notice what emotions you're feeling? Yeah, okay, and then what happened then? So after you felt that way, what happened next? And then, you know, how do you feel about that now? And I think that process of really starting to draw their attention to their internal experience and, you know, helping them formulate words around what that means really begins that process of connecting to themselves and connecting to other people in a healthy way. So it's probably not reasonable to expect, you know, younger children to do a 10-minute meditation, even a 5-minute meditation. But you can do really short breathing exercises with them, like, you know, let's do X amount of slow breaths and build up the amount of time gradually. And then, as I say, you know, talking, you know, just being really open and honest about how you feel. So I'm feeling frustrated right now. I can feel it in my fists and, you know, in the back of my neck. What I'm going to do now is do this. I'm going to take a moment to myself, and also talking through their internal experience as well.
Brilliant, that's really useful. I'm quite convinced that I heard a few years ago that there was a government scheme of introducing mindfulness coaching in primary schools, wasn't there? I think some primary schools are doing mindfulness sessions with children.
Yeah, some of them are. I haven't heard much about it happening around my area, but I know that there definitely was an initiative. So it'd be interesting to know how many schools it's actually in. I know that when they have put mindfulness into schools, or when they've replaced detention with you know, mindful activities, they've definitely reaped benefits from it. I think the challenge is, as always, funding and you know, having a wide enough network of people that can deliver it.
Okay, right, well, I think we've just about run out of time. So thanks once again, Sam. That was really interesting. And as I say, definitely some useful tips there for how to get the balance right in these maybe not so busy times at the moment for some of us, but yeah, maybe it's the time to actually spend take time out and do a bit of relaxation and reconnecting. So yeah, thanks again, Sam. That was really good, and thanks to everybody else for logging in and for listening. And yeah, another message that's come through. Thank you, Sam. So yeah, that was great. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.